So I'll be giving you a walkthrough, like how Angular framework started, like where it is, and what's coming up, right? So that's why I have. Okay, so my talk name is the framework of the past, present, and future because I believe in it. Like Angular has a great future. It had a great past, and I think the present is beautiful, right? That's what we say. The present is beautiful. And okay, it's a journey of Angular framework. So before I go ahead, let me give you a small introduction about myself. My name is Santosh Yadav, and I'm a senior software engineer at Celonis. So I work on the platform team. I'm also a GD for Angular, so that's why I'm here talking about Angular. No, because I love Angular. I'm also a GitHub star, so it's a program by GitHub. I've been recognized as NX champion. The other tool I love a lot. I'll be talking about NX in Berlin, CityJS Berlin as well. And I'm an Auth0 ambassador. I'm also part of or a co-founder of a community called This Is Learning. So we have blogs called This Is Learning, and in case you are in Angular, you might have heard about This Is Angular. So that's the blog post we run as part of this community. And in case someone wants to be part of this community, just let me know. We can onboard you as a writer probably, in case you want to share your knowledge. I'm available on social media, of course. Twitter is where I'm most of the time, apart from my house. Just kidding. And I'm also available on GitHub and LinkedIn with the same handle, Santosh Yadav Dev. So let's go. Let's get started, right? So this is the day when everything started, right? So September 14, 2016, the Angular 2.0 got released, almost 7 years back. And it's in today's world where you get a new framework every 2 weeks. It's hard to be relevant for 7 years, right? It's a very really long years, and Angular is still relevant for many of the enterprises where it really shines, and it's going strong. Like I'll show you what's coming up. But one thing about Angular is Angular really thinks a lot about choosing the stacks or the tools because, of course, Angular thinks about future. It's not like they want to integrate a tool or they want to integrate a build tool which will be gone after 2 months. Like everyone knows what happened to Rome, right? After a year, it's nowhere to be seen. And just think about a framework like Angular investing in a build tool which is gone in a year. So when Angular started, they announced it way back, like 2014, that they will be using TypeScript. So Angular was the first framework to actually go ahead and invest in TypeScript. They said, okay, we'll go full in TypeScript, and they started writing the framework in TypeScript. There was a time when Angular team thought, like, let's give them choices, right? So you can choose TypeScript, JavaScript, and there was something else called Dart, which still exists somewhere on the internet. You can still search for it. But yeah, so TypeScript, everyone knows what happened after a few years, right? When Angular said it will choose TypeScript, people were against it. People literally said they will never use Angular because it uses TypeScript. And now, I don't know, just tell me the framework which doesn't use TypeScript apart from Turbo, right? Let's not talk about Turbo. But yeah, so that was a great choice, one of the tools which Angular team invested in, and they helped to become TypeScript popular, right? So one of the blog posts from Microsoft a few years back, they said they owe it to the Angular team for believing in them, and that's why we have a strong future of TypeScript as of today. The other tool which Angular team picked up really early was Webpack. I hope you recognize this logo, right? So this is Webpack. You can see web, spider's web. But when it started, Angular was not using Webpack, right? So Angular 2.0, anyone who tried Angular 2.0 here? Thank God. Okay, you did. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So there was option, right? So you had System.js, you had Webpack, but you had to write your own configuration. Just think about writing thousands of lines of configuration file and maintaining it. So Angular team realized that, okay, we are giving this solution, but this will not scale. Probably after a few years, people will be lost in this all configuration files, and they won't be able to see what's going on. I mean, it's not a bad thing to learn about any new build tool, right? Of course, you will learn something extra. But this is a wrong expectation as well, because Angular really shines in enterprises, and enterprises, no one has time, right? I mean, product managers needs a new feature every day. I don't know for whom, but they need it. So, uh, so what they did, so Angular team realized, okay, this is not going to scale up. So few releases, after few releases, like Angular 4, they came up with, with an idea of Angular CLI. They said, hey, we will not give you Webpack configuration. You don't have to write it. We will write it for you. We will hide it for you. And let's forget System.js. Let's think that this never existed. So they dropped the support. They said, let's go with Webpack, because they believed in it, right? They said, Webpack is the tool which will be valid, or which will grow for next few years. Of course, like everyone knows what's the future of Webpack is. Now every other company is claiming they are the replacement for Webpack. I don't know who actually is the replacement for Webpack, but let's see, the time will tell. So Angular team said, okay, we will give you two new APIs. They called it as schematics and builders. So what happened? So when you start a new application, what you do? You create a new project. How you do it? So Angular CLI came up with the solution. They said, okay, there is a command called ng-generate application. You can create a new application. You don't have to worry about your folder structure. For new projects, most of the teams fight for a month just to finalize the folder structure. Angular team said, yeah, day one, done. You don't have to fight for it. So they call those APIs as schematics. So you got few more commands. For example, creating a new component. React, should I name it as my M capital, my component C capital, or should I use hyphen? Angular team said, hey, don't worry about it. Just do ng-generate component and your component is created. We follow the same structure everywhere. So for component, directives, services, everything is a single command. You don't have to argue with your colleagues, hey, this file naming convention is wrong. It's the standard trick, because Angular CLI team said. And then, so these are a few commands. For example, ng-generate app, library, ng-generate component. There are many. So you don't have to worry about or argue about like how my file naming structure should be, or how my application should look like. Angular team also realized that after a few years, people will be fighting if I do npm start, or if I do npm run start, or whatever a new person comes with, right? So they said, okay, let's close this discussion down. We will give you some commands which are unique, which are standard for all the workspaces. So they came up with Builders API, where they did this. So if you're not from Angular, don't worry about it. This is a simple angular.json file, which have the mapping between your command. For example, if you think about some standards, right? So you have build, you have start, you have test, you have end-to-end, right? These are standard commands which you do. So for every command, they said we will plug in one tool, one build tool. You don't have to worry about it. So here you can see on line number 3, it's for build. The tool is build Angular browser, which uses Webpack internally. So you don't have to worry about all the configuration of Webpack. Same for serve, it uses Webpack internally. For test, it used to use Karma, but yeah, the time is changing. Now we have new tool. But what is the advantage of using these builders? Because, you know, there are some restrictions when you use something which is built in. You may want to extend it. Developers love to like extend tools because they like it, probably, right? Even though you don't need to override, you just say, okay, let's do this. Probably I will learn something new, right? So with this builders, with this schematics and builders, they actually made this APIs public with Angular 6. They said, hey, these APIs are public in case you want to extend it, because of course, they don't want to restrict you. They don't want to say, okay, these are the only configuration you can use. You can do whatever you want to. You want to extend Webpack, go ahead and do that. We have opened this API for everyone. And schematics and builders API actually led to inspiration for NX DevTools. How many of you know NX DevTools? Okay. Oh my God. Okay. You should read about it. It's a build tool for everyone. It's not related to only Angular or not related only to front end. You can use it anywhere. So it led to in the inspiration and NX DevTools like adopted these APIs and they have now built a solid build tool which exists. After again, like Angular 6 release again came up with one more addition. So Angular team realized that what you do in enterprises, what you do, you fight over the architecture, right? You have a full team like of architectures who keeps fighting in every call. This is how it should be. This is how it should be. So they said, okay, let's come up with the monorepo support. If you see it, as of today, not any other framework has monorepo support. What do you mean by monorepo support? So you can create a workspace, you can have multiple applications, multiple libraries, you can split your libraries to a smaller, like let's say UI library, right? Or your state library. Angular had the support since 2017. So with Angular 16, with Angular 6, with Angular 6, they actually gave us this functionality. What else? Angular team realized that one day Node.js will screw up and we will left with no option only to fight with ESM versus CommonJS. How many of you are still struggling with it? CommonJS versus ESM, right? There are a few who are already fighting with it. So Angular team realized that, okay, this will happen like in future. And they said, okay, let's stop this right now. With again, Angular 6, they came up with the idea of support for authoring libraries. So Angular came up with a special format, and you don't have to worry about whether you're generating an ESM output or you're generating a CommonJS output. You just need to worry about your library. That's it. Your library should compile. Even the advantage is, if you create a library, let's say in Angular 9, it's possible that it may work in Angular 13 or 14 as well, like 5 major versions, right? Not even Node.js supports that. So how you do this? So you just have to create a command, run a command called nggenerate, give your library name. What it does, you don't have to do anything. No setup needed. Can be published to NPM. Yes, it can be published to NPM. And it uses a special format called Angular package format, so you don't have to worry about CommonJS or ESM. Again, after this, there was a period the Angular developers call it as an IV period. Nothing happened that time. So between those period, nothing new happened. Angular team said, okay, what we want to do is we have our rendering engine, and we want to actually fix that rendering engine. We want to write something new, which will help us in future. But that took a long time. So literally, I could see there was frustration among Angular community. They said, looks like Angular is not moving, and it's not the right tool for the job right now. But of course, the Angular team was preparing something for a better future, right? They knew that the existing rendering engine has limitation, and we cannot scale up. So the IV period was very silent period, probably uh, one of the most silent period in the Angular development history. But after that, they came back. Now you might have seen people are actually talking about Angular again. Why? So let's see some of the features which Angular has implemented in past few releases. In Angular, let's say to communicate between multiple components, you use something known as input. So it's like a HTML property, like you can actually add this property as an HTML property on any component, and then you can pass data from anyone. It's very useful in case you're writing your, sorry, if you're writing your own UI component library, which is reusable. So what has changed? So let's say if I want to make an input property as mandatory input, what do you do? I mean, as earlier, this is what we used to do. So we have an input property, like this is something which will be provided by a parent component who will be using this component. And then I have a check, and I'm throwing an exception. Where do you think this exception will be thrown? Of course, runtime. Does it really matter? I mean, probably as a developer, I can miss this. And one of the user finds in production and then tweets on Twitter, right? That, oh, this tool sucks. This is what they do. So Angular team realized, okay, this is a common pattern, and we should not do this. I mean, this is why it should be so complicated. So Angular team came up with a solution. Okay, so this is 20. I'm really sorry for this font size, but yeah. So let's see the solution. So Angular team said, hey, you don't have to do that anymore. So now the input is really powerful. You can say with input property called required true. And now what will happen is you will get this error during compile time. So as soon as you serve your application and you don't pass this property, you will get the error. So you don't get this error on at runtime or even in production. So you can like create really meaningful UI components with all the required properties where you can actually throw an exception in case your developers or the consumers of your tool try to not pass this property. So this is one of the addition with input. But again, there is again one of the common pattern of transforming data. So let's say if you want to create, if you want to get a Boolean value and then you want to show the status like active, inactive, what we do? So this is the way to do it right now. I mean, so you say, okay, hey input, let's take a Boolean property, and then you create another private property and say, okay, if it is true, pass active or do an active, and then you have to write setters and getters. Angular team said, okay, you don't have to do this anymore, and now you have an API for this as well. So now you got transform as a property. So what you can do is, now you can pass a transform property. You can receive an input of different type, and then you can, while rendering, you can show it as a string. You don't have to do getters and setters anymore. Angular team realized that this is very common pattern. So what we can do is, here on line number, okay, yeah, I have to, yeah. If I'm going back or front, okay, sorry. Yeah. So Angular team realized that this is a very common pattern and transforming Boolean value and number value. So they said, okay, now we have built-in transformer for you. So you don't have to write any extra code for this. So you can say transform number attribute or transform Boolean attribute, and it will convert your values. You don't have to do anything. And they are actually available as part of, really sorry, I'm just really bad at handling this. So you can, from Angular core, you can say Boolean attribute or number attribute, and that's it. So you don't have to write any extra code here as well. Component authoring. I'm sure if you are an Angular developer or you have tried Angular any time in past, you know the pain of authoring a component. So you have to write a component, you have to write a module. Why? Because of course you have to write it, right? And then you have to register a component using declarations property. And whenever someone teaches this to you, they says, okay, you have to register it. Why? Okay, just register it, forget about it. So Angular team realized, okay, this is not something which is going to scale up in future. So Angular team now, with Angular 14, came up with new way to author component. Now we call this as a standalone component. It means you don't have to write modules anymore. Are modules going anywhere? Probably going for a walk, but they still exist inside the framework. They will still exist in case you want to use it. They are not going to be deprecated or being going to be removed. You just need to pass this standalone true property, and then you can use component as a standalone component anywhere. This brings some advantages. So in past, whenever you used to have a child component inside one of the component, actually your parent component never knows about that child component. It was Angular language service is something which was making it possible for you to navigate through IDE, but that was the Angular language service, not Angular itself. So with standalone component, the advantage is you are going to register all the component with your parent component. So it knows that, okay, this component exists. You might have seen that, okay, when you run your unit test, you get an error or warning that this element does not or is not recognized, or this is not a valid property of this element. Very common error in case you try to run unit test. You will not get that warning anymore when you try to run your unit test with standalone component. If you have standalone component, not have standalone component, you will still get that error. Okay, so what else? What's happening after standalone component? In future version, the standalone property will go away. The standalone component will be the default way of writing or authoring a component. So that's what's happening in future. Standalone APIs, of course, once modules are vanished or no one uses modules, Angular has to provide a way to use the existing functionality, because as of today, Angular relies heavily on the modules itself. For example, here is an example of providing a router. Let me just increase the font size. Yeah. So here is an example of providing a router, providing an HTTP service, providing an animation. So this is how we do it with modules. But as I said, modules will be not used probably in future. So what's the new way of doing it? So Angular team came up with something known as standalone APIs. So now you can just say, hey, provide router, provide HTTP client, provide animations. And these are actually services, because Angular team says, because these are all services, right? These are the services we are providing to the framework. So now this is the new way using standalone. But there is more coming. Currently, the Angular HTTP client uses XML HTTP request internally, which has problem. You cannot use it on edge. So provide HTTP client is coming with a new option called with fetch. So it uses fetch API internally, but there are some limitations. This is actually in developer preview, only works with Node 18, because that's where the fetch API is available natively. Otherwise, you won't be able to use it. So make sure in case you try to run Angular on edge, you are using provide HTTP client with fetch. Angular has support for lazy loading like way before, like from Angular 2 onwards. So of course, as a front-end developers, you know lazy loading, right? I don't have to go into detail and tell you what lazy loading is. So in Angular, you have to use router. So this is how we do it in Angular. You have to say, okay, load children property, and go ahead and load this particular module called rooms module at interaction time. You can change the behavior when you want to lazy load this module, but this is how we used to do it. But again, modules are going away. How to do that? So the new way is actually to use a new API again. So now you can lazy load component by using this load component API. So routing is moved from module to component now. So you can lazy load components of course, with the help of routing. One of the things which Angular really figured out when it started. So Angular team knew that, okay, moving from one version to another version is very costly, especially for enterprises, right? They cannot just invest 2 months' time migrating your application to a new version. It costs money, a lot of money. I mean, in case they have vendors, they will just like cost you millions of rupees just to migrate from one version to another. So with Angular CLI, Angular also came up with the idea of migrations. What you can do is, you can just run one single command that's called ng update. And then you migrate from one version to next major version without doing anything. You don't have to write in even a single line of code. It may fail in case you have some third-party library dependency, which is not probably used in a correct way. That only can cause issue, but Angular will never cause you issue. You can easily migrate using ng update from one version to another version. You can still go to update.angular.io, and you can still read the document, like guidelines, how you can migrate from one version to another. You don't have to actually do it manually. You have to run the command. It lists all the command which you have to run, and it will tell you the difference, that what should happen. And it is always recommended that you should migrate from you should migrate to another like major version. If you are on Angular 10, migrate to 11, then 12, then 13. Don't like jump from 10 to 16 directly, because it's easier. No, it's not. Okay, so even NX DevTools took an inspiration from ng update, and they also have something known as NX migrate. And let me tell you, that works for React as well. So in case you are using React application, you are using Webpack, you can just install NX, add NX as dependency, do NX migrate, and you get migrated to Vite by default without doing anything. It will take care of 90% of the migration for you. So yeah, something for React developers as well. We are in 2023. One of the biggest issue with slow performing websites is images, right? Because your product manager said, hey, take this 2 MB of image and upload it on the website. And you said, okay, I don't care about it. So Angular team, with the help of Aurora team, Google Aurora team, which also worked with Next.js and Nuxt, and many other frameworks to come up with a new solution for optimized images. So Angular has a solution called ng optimized image. It's a directive which you can use today. And this is backported to Angular 13. So in case you are still stuck on Angular 13 for any reason, you can still go ahead and use it. So the advantage of this directive is you can, this will actually lazy load your images. You don't have to do anything. You can also add the different providers. For example, it had support for Cloudinary. And here you can see it also had support for image X loader. You can provide your own custom configuration, like you can provide your own CDN here as well. And the only change you have to make from SRC, you have to just do ng-src. And this will start lazy loading your images. It will also add prefetch property to your images. So it works faster. And it takes care of your images on different viewports as well. So you don't have to worry about your images anymore. Angular takes care of it. Hydration. I think we just had a talk about like server-side data rendering, right? Or server-side state management. And there was a topic called hydration. Angular has support for SSR. How many of you know that? Okay, one. I mean, it's Angular's fault because they never really promoted it, right? I mean, I have never used it on production. Like, I have used it so far only once on production, Angular's SSR. Okay, so they had Angular SSR from Angular 4 onwards, and there was a problem with the hydration. How many of you know about the partial hydration? Of course, we don't give a damn about all these buzzwords because those are buzzwords. But yeah, Angular had this problem with dehydration for so long because when you use SSR, it actually destroys all the DOM element and re-renders it once the state is transferred on the client. Not a very good way, right? I mean, the problem is, in case you come across any Angular website which uses SSR, just notice there will be a blank page for a very tiny fraction of a second, because that's where Angular destroys all the DOM nodes and re-renders it on your client. So Angular team said, yeah, we know that it is an issue, but it took us just 7 years to resolve it. So they finally, after 7 years, they said, okay, we have a solution. And the community was like, what? We are not rewriting our code. They said, no, you don't have to. So only line of code which you need to do is this. So in case you are using Angular modules, you just need to provide this, provide client hydration. In case you are using standalone, you just need to provide client hydration as a service. That's it. The single line of change, which took 7 years. 7 years to just reach here. So, okay, but at least we are here. Okay, so let's move on and let's talk about some other changes. In Angular, we use services whenever you want to actually have any business logic. The recommended way is to write your services. But there is a problem. The way you use services is this. I'm still again. Okay, so the way you use services in Angular is this. So you have a constructor, because everything is a class in Angular, right? So you have a constructor, you inject a service, and then you use that service. So you can see, okay. On line number 2, right? So we are here. I'm really sorry. So on line number 5 and 6, this is the way to inject a service. And line number 2, you can see how you can use that particular service. So you can just get an instance, call any methods. But it has a restriction. You can only use inside a constructor. It means you have to have a class, right? So you have, because constructors are available inside a class. But Angular team realized that, okay, this is something which we want to avoid in future. So they came up with a new API called inject. With help of this inject function, you can use actually your services anywhere. You can also use the services inside a function. So you don't have to rely on constructor injection anymore. Advantage? We can move away from classes. Does it mean we are going to have functional components in Angular? No. I don't like it. Personally, my opinion is no. But yeah, you never know. So as of today, you can have functional guards, functional interceptors. Some of the third-party libraries, for example, NGRX, they are adopting this inject function to simplify their APIs. For example, for effects, for writing effects, they used to have classes. Now they have moved on to something called as create effect function. So you don't have to like go ahead and write classes everywhere. You can just move on to functions as well. That's possible. Okay, so change direction in signals. This is one of the magical thing which happens inside Angular. I'll just show you a small example, not a very big demo, but let's see if you can, if it makes sense for you, especially if you're not using Angular, right? So to use a property in Angular, this is how you do it. So on line number on line number 19, we have a property called product. Line number 21, which is a function which adds a product, right? And to render this, we just put this property here. How does this work? Does it make sense? I mean, just have a property and then it's rendered whenever you make some changes. So there is a magical thing which is happening behind the scene, which is called as zone.js. In case you are an Angular developer, this is something which you know. So zone.js is responsible for finding out what has changed and re-render it. So in case you make some changes to product, Angular sends a signal to zone.js. Zone.js looks into your application, says, okay, there is a change, and re-renders it. It works perfectly fine. It works perfectly fine. But in case you have a very big enterprise application, this is where you start to get a performance bottlenecks, right? So you look for solution. And once you start looking for a solution, it says, okay, go ahead and use RxJS. Go ahead and use NGRX. Go ahead and do reactive programming. Why? Just to simplify all these issues? Okay, not worth it. So Angular team finally, after many years, said, okay, we are introducing a new primitive called signals. And I think people from React knows what signals are, right? You might have heard it from Ryan Carniato. He used it in SolidJS, right? That's how it works. Preact also uses signals. Vue also uses signals in some other way. I mean, not signals, but yeah, some of the APIs. So with the introduction of signals, it resolved this issue. Now you don't have to rely on zone.js. Because here, once you create a property as signal, and you put this property in your template, there is a contract between these two. So Angular will create a graph. It will maintain that graph. Okay, it will say, okay, this is the signal property, this is the template property, and this is the mapping. And whenever something changes, it knows. So in future, zone.js becomes optional. And that's the end goal of using signals or introducing signals as of today. So as I said, not going to be a very big demo, but the question is, as of today, Angular developers are taught to actually write reactive code. They are asked to write RxJS, they are asked to use NGRX, all these reactive patterns. And Angular team want you to have a very smooth migration in future. They want you to have a very good integration with RxJS as well as signals. So they created new APIs called toObservable and toSignals. Is it like? Okay. So the new two APIs called toObservable and toSignals are available. So you can convert a signal to observable, observable to signal. You get best of both worlds, right? You can still have your existing code. You can convert it to signal, make make zone.js optional. Still works. For accessing router data, this is one of the thing which Angular developers do a lot because we have access to router. And the way to do it today is this. So you have something called activated route, which gives you access to all the router data which is available. But in future, you will be able to do it, no, not in future, but as of today, you can do this. You can define any property on your router. You can access any properties which is available with your router with a single line of code. I'm saying you don't have to do activated route anymore. So what you do is, with standalone APIs, we can provide something called with component input binding. And then on component, you just define an input property. That's it. Single line of code. You don't have to do anything. You get access to all the router data here once you define your input property. Cool. So what's more? I mean, yeah. It means I'm very close to the slides. Okay, so Angular team realizes that Webpack is not going to be like available for upcoming future. No one knows its futures, right? I mean, there are people who are fighting about it, like I'm the next replacement of Webpack. So Angular team said, let's move on. Let's move on, and now we have support for ESBuild. So, so ESBuild support is available for Angular. It's in developer preview as of now, so you can use ESBuild with Angular as of today. But Angular team went ahead and said, okay, we are coming up with a new builder where you can actually use ESBuild plus Vite for SSR, SSG, and as well as like the default way to build your application. So this is something which is also coming. Just support, no one uses Karma anymore. Karma is deprecated. If you are not aware, they deprecated it a few months back. And now you have just support in Angular. This is still experimental, but will be probably stable in future. Angular team has 2 new RFCs for control flow and deferred loading. So these are still like under discussion. In case you want to give your views, just go to these discussions on on GitHub, and you can give your inputs as well. If you want something to be added in Angular, Angular has Angular Survey available. You can just go to angular.io. There is a link for Angular Survey. You can give your inputs if you're happy with the state of Angular, if you want something new to be added. And that's it. Thank you, CityJS and Hubstack. Thanks to my GitHub sponsors.